We were alone that night, and in the silence, I realized there was a secret between us neither of us had ever dared to name. The house didn't become quiet all at once. It happened gradually, like a held breath finally being released. The laughter from earlier faded, footsteps moved farther away, doors closed softly one after another, until it was just us, and the low hum of the night settling in around the walls. I hadn't planned on staying this late. I told myself I was only waiting for my ride, only finishing my tea. But the truth was, something about the calm made it hard to rush. The lights were dimmed to a warm glow, not bright enough to demand attention, not dark enough to feel uncertain. It felt like a space meant for honesty, even if neither of us had named it yet. She moved through the room with an ease that came from familiarity. Not rushed, not self-conscious. She rolled the sleeves of her sweater up just past her wrists as she reached for another mug, and I caught myself noticing small details I usually ignored. The quiet grace in her movements, the way she paused before speaking, choosing her words with care. When she handed me the mug, our fingers touched. It was brief, almost accidental, but the warmth of her skin stayed with me longer than it should have. I felt it travel up my arm, settling somewhere deep in my chest. She didn't pull back quickly. Neither did I. We both pretended it was nothing, but the air shifted anyway. We sat down, leaving just enough space between us to be polite. Still, I could feel her presence clearly, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, the faint scent of something soft and familiar. Not perfume meant to impress, but something that belonged to her. Comforting. Real. Outside, the night pressed gently against the windows. Inside, time slowed. Conversation came easily at first, small things, safe things. But underneath every word was an awareness I couldn't ignore. A quiet alertness, like standing too close to the edge of something meaningful without knowing how deep it went. I became aware of myself in a new way, how I was sitting, how often I glanced her way. I wondered if she noticed the same shift I did. The stillness between us wasn't awkward. It was full. Heavy in a way that didn't suffocate but invited attention. That's when it happened, the realization I wasn't ready for. Not a sudden rush of desire, not a dramatic thought. Just a simple, steady understanding settling into place. This night wasn't ordinary. There was something unspoken forming in the quiet, something neither of us had asked for, yet neither of us was pushing away. A secret not built on words, but on awareness. On the way silence stretched comfortably between us. On the way my heart seemed to listen more closely than usual. The silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt intentional, as if neither of us wanted to rush past it. We sat on the couch, close enough that I could sense her warmth without touching her. The cushions dipped slightly toward the center, subtly closing the distance we hadn't acknowledged out loud. She crossed her legs slowly, adjusting her posture, and I noticed how careful her movements were. Not tense, just thoughtful. Like she was aware of herself in the space, aware of me. I told myself not to read into it, but my attention kept drifting back to the smallest details. The way her hands rested loosely in her lap. The faint lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, carrying years of lived experience rather than fatigue. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock somewhere behind us. Each second felt louder than the last. I wondered if she felt it too, that strange awareness that comes when silence stops being neutral and starts to feel personal. She said something casual, almost offhand, and when I laughed, she smiled wider than necessary. Her hand lifted, resting briefly on my forearm as if to emphasize her point. The touch was light, almost testing. Her fingers were warm, steady, not rushed. When she pulled her hand back, the place where she'd touched me felt suddenly cooler, like something important had just passed through and left its mark. I shifted slightly, my knee brushing against hers. It was accidental, or at least that's what I told myself. Neither of us moved away. The contact stayed, quiet and undeniable. I felt a slow awareness spread through me. Not excitement exactly, but something deeper. A recognition. Like my body understood something my mind was still trying to catch up to. I glanced at her, and for a moment, she was already looking at me. Our eyes met and held longer than politeness required. There was no challenge in her gaze, no expectation. Just curiosity, warmth, a softness that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. I became aware of my breathing, of how close she was, of the fact that if either of us leaned just a little closer, the space between us would disappear. That thought alone was enough to make my pulse slow and sharpen at the same time. I wondered if she felt the same quiet pull, if she was counting the seconds the way I was, if she was aware of how the silence had changed shape, how it now carried weight, like something fragile that could break if spoken too loudly. Inside, a secret began to form. Not a plan, not a desire I was ready to admit, just an understanding that this moment mattered, that it wasn't one-sided, that whatever was growing between us was shared, even if unnamed. The conversation shifted without either of us guiding it there. One moment we were talking about small, harmless things, work, routines, how quickly time seemed to move, and the next there was a pause that felt heavier than before. She leaned back slightly, exhaling as if she'd decided something. "You ever feel like you planned your life one way," she said quietly, "and then realized you're standing somewhere completely different?" Her voice wasn't sad. It was honest. The kind of honesty that doesn't ask for sympathy, only understanding. I nodded, unsure how much to say. "Yeah," I replied, "more often than I admit." She smiled at that, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Instead, she looked down at her hands, fingers lightly intertwined. I noticed how still they were, how controlled, as if holding something delicate inside. She spoke about choices, about doing what was expected, about strength that comes from responsibility. Not in a way that sounded bitter, but reflective. Each word carried the weight of experience. I listened closely, leaning in without realizing it, drawn not just to what she was saying, but to the courage it took to say it out loud. When she glanced up, she noticed how close I was. Our knees touched again, more firmly this time. I expected one of us to move. Neither did. "I don't usually talk about this," she added, almost apologetically. "You don't have to stop," I said softly, and I meant it. Something shifted then. Her shoulders relaxed, just slightly, as if she'd been holding herself upright for so long. She'd forgotten what it felt like to let go. But inside me, a different tension was forming. I was aware of how this might look, how it might sound if explained to someone else. The difference in our lives, in our experiences, the assumptions people make. I wondered if she was thinking the same thing, if this closeness felt risky to her too. My mind searched for rules, for reasons to step back. Yet my body stayed still, present, honest. She reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and the movement exposed the side of her neck. The gesture was unconscious, intimate in its simplicity. I looked away quickly, reminding myself to breathe. This was the conflict, not desire alone but awareness. The knowing that this moment mattered enough to require care. That crossing even a small emotional line couldn't be undone. She looked at me again, more directly this time. "Sometimes," she said, pausing between words, "you meet someone who makes you feel noticed, and it surprises you." Her gaze didn't waver. I swallowed, my heart beating a little louder than before. "That can be unsettling," I replied. She nodded. "Yes, because then you have to decide what to do with it." The silence returned, but now it was layered with meaning. Our eyes held, neither searching, neither retreating. In that space, everything unspoken pressed gently against us. Desire, doubt, tenderness, restraint. The silence didn't rush us this time, settled gently like it knew we needed it. I could feel the steady warmth where our knees still touched, a quiet reminder that neither of us had stepped back. The clock ticked somewhere behind us, but it no longer felt loud, felt distant, unimportant. She was the one who spoke first, though her voice was softer now, more deliberate. "I don't usually feel this open," she said, choosing each word carefully. "Especially not when I'm not expecting to." She didn't look at me right away. Instead, her eyes rested on the floor, as if she was giving herself permission to be honest without needing reassurance yet. I stayed still, afraid that even a small movement might interrupt the courage it took for her to say that out loud. "I think," she continued, then paused, exhaling slowly. "I think I feel seen tonight," and that caught me off guard. The words landed quietly, but their weight filled the room. I turned toward her fully then. "I feel it too," I said, keeping my voice low, like something shifted. "I don't really know how to explain it." She looked up at me, and this time there was no uncertainty in her gaze, just openness, recognition. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached out, not quickly, not hesitantly, but with a calm certainty. Her hand rested over mine, fingers warm and relaxed, her thumb lightly touching the side of my knuckle. The contact was grounding, intentional, not asking for more, only acknowledging what already existed. My breath caught slightly, but I didn't move away. Instead, I let my hand remain beneath hers, feeling the subtle pressure, the quiet reassurance in that simple gesture. "I don't want to pretend this isn't happening," she said softly, "but I also don't want to rush it or misread it." "I don't either," I replied. "I just know it feels real." Her lips curved into a small, relieved smile, the kind that comes when something difficult has finally been said. We held each other's gaze, the closeness no longer accidental. There was tenderness there, care, a shared understanding that this moment wasn't about impulse, but awareness. She squeezed my hand gently, then let it rest there a little longer before slowly pulling back. Even as she did, the warmth lingered, like the touch had settled deeper than skin. "I'm glad you stayed," she said quietly. "So am I," I answered, and felt the truth of it fully. The tension that had wrapped around my chest earlier loosened, replaced by something steadier. Not certainty about the future, but clarity about the present. Whatever this was, it wasn't imagined. It wasn't one-sided. It was acknowledged. As we sat there, closer now in spirit than before, I realized that honesty hadn't broken the moment. It had softened it, made room for trust, for patience, for something that could grow without being forced. And in that gentle exchange, her hand on mine, her words spoken without armor, I understood that this night wasn't defined by secrecy anymore. The honesty lingered between us, not heavy anymore, but warm, like something carefully placed where it belonged. We didn't rush to fill the space with words. We didn't need to. The understanding we'd reached felt steady enough to sit with quietly. She shifted closer, slowly, as if checking whether the moment would hold. Her shoulder brushed against mine, light at first, then resting there. I felt the warmth of her through the fabric, a calm pressure that grounded me. I didn't move away. Instead, I let myself lean in just slightly, enough to let her know she was welcome there. After a moment, she tilted her head and rested it against my shoulder. The weight was gentle, trusting. I became acutely aware of how still she was, how relaxed. My breath slowed to match the rhythm of hers, careful not to disturb the closeness we'd found. I lifted my hand, hesitating for just a second, then placed it lightly on her back, not pulling her closer, just there. My palm felt the rise and fall of her breathing, steady and unguarded. The contact sent a quiet warmth through me. Not urgency, not desire demanding more, but connection, presence. She let out a soft breath, almost a sigh, as if something inside her had finally eased. Her arms slipped around my waist, resting there naturally, her fingers curling slightly into the fabric of my shirt. The gesture was simple, but it carried meaning. It said trust. It said comfort. We stayed like that for a long moment, the world narrowed down to the feel of closeness. The way her head fit against me, the subtle warmth where our bodies met. I could feel her heartbeat through the contact, calm and reassuring. It made me aware of my own, steadying to match hers. "This feels safe," she said quietly, her voice slightly muffled against my shoulder. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "It does," I replied. "Like we don't have to pretend." She shifted just enough to look up at me, her face close now. Our eyes met again, and this time there was no tension pulling us apart. Just warmth, care, a shared decision to be here without rushing ahead. I brushed my thumb lightly along her arm. An unconscious movement, slow and gentle. Her skin was warm beneath my touch. She didn't flinch or pull back. Instead, she smiled softly, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes without effort. We embraced fully then, not tight, not urgent. Just close. Her arms wrapped around me, settling comfortably, her cheek resting against my chest. I could feel the quiet steadiness of her there, the strength beneath her softness. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The uncertainty that had lingered earlier faded, replaced by calm. This wasn't crossing a line recklessly. It was stepping into something with care, with mutual understanding. We weren't defining anything. We weren't promising more than the moment could hold. But we were choosing not to pull away. Eventually, the embrace loosened. Not because either of us wanted to pull away, but because the night itself seemed to ask for gentleness. She stayed close, though, her arm still resting around my waist, my hand remaining at her back as if it belonged there now. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt unfinished. She lifted her head slightly, just enough to look at me again. Her expression was calm, thoughtful, grounded. "We should talk about this," she said softly. "Not to define it, just to understand it." I appreciated that, the care in her words, the way she wasn't trying to name the future, only to protect the present. "I want that," I replied. "I don't want this to feel confusing later." She nodded, relieved. "Good." We shifted so we were facing each other more openly. Still close, knees touching, the warmth familiar now. She spoke about boundaries not as walls but as respect. About taking things slowly. About how meaningful this felt precisely because it wasn't rushed or hidden behind excuses. I listened, really listened. Not just to her words, but to the intention behind them. The strength it took to be this careful. This honest. "I don't want either of us to feel like we crossed something we weren't ready for," she said. "I want this to feel right, not reckless." "It does feel right," I answered, "because we're paying attention." She smiled at that, a genuine smile, and reached out again, her fingers brushing mine. This time, when our hands met, they fit together naturally. No hesitation, no tension, just a quiet acceptance. The night had deepened outside, the world beyond the windows dark and still. Inside, the room felt warmer, lighter somehow. Like the hardest part, acknowledging what was there, was already behind us. When it was time to leave, neither of us rushed. She walked me to the door, our steps unhurried, side by side. At the threshold, we paused, facing each other again in the soft light from the hallway. She reached up, smoothing the front of my jacket in a small, affectionate gesture, then let her hand rest briefly against my chest. I could feel the warmth of her palm there, steady and sure. "I'm glad we didn't pretend tonight," she said quietly. "Me too," I replied. She leaned in then, not fast, not uncertain, and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. It lingered just long enough to say everything neither of us needed to put into words. When she pulled back, her hand stayed on my arm for a moment, her thumb resting there as if to anchor the memory. "Good night," she said, her voice gentle. "Good night," I answered. As I stepped out into the cool air, I felt calm, not restless, not longing, just settled. The secret that had begun earlier in the evening no longer felt like something hidden or dangerous. It felt understood, honored. That night didn't end with promises or declarations. It ended with clarity, with mutual respect, with the quiet confidence that whatever came next would be chosen carefully, together. Morning arrived gently, the way it does after a night that lingers in your thoughts. Light filtered through the curtains, soft and pale, touching the edges of the room without urgency. I woke with a calm I didn't expect. No rush of questions, no second-guessing. Just a quiet awareness of what had been shared. As I moved through the morning, small details kept pulling me back to the night before. The warmth of her hand over mine. The steadiness in her voice when she spoke honestly. The way that single moment of closeness had felt less like a spark and more like a slow, reassuring glow. When I saw her again, it wasn't dramatic. No long pause, no sudden rush toward each other. just a shared look across the room that said everything words didn't need to. Her eyes softened when they met mine, and she smiled small, knowing, unguarded. We found ourselves alone for a moment, standing near the window where the light fell just right. She stood closer than before, not touching yet, but present, comfortable. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Better than I expected." She nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. She reached out then, straightening the collar of my shirt in a quiet, affectionate gesture. Her fingers brushed my neck briefly, warm against my skin. The touch was casual, but it carried intention. Familiarity already forming. "I'm glad about last night," she said softly. "I keep thinking about how calm it felt." "So do I," I replied. "It didn't feel like something we had to escape from." She smiled at that, her hand lingering for a moment before dropping back to her side. We stood there in the morning light, close enough to feel each other's presence, grounded in the same understanding. There was no urgency to define anything, no pressure to explain ourselves to the world. What mattered was that something had changed, and it felt like growth, not risk. As it was time to go, she walked me out again. This time, when we reached the door, she didn't hesitate. She leaned in and kissed my cheek once more, a little closer to the corner of my mouth than before. Her hand rested on my arm, steady and warm. "Take care," she said. "You too," I answered. As I stepped away, I felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more settled, like a part of me had found its place. That night alone hadn't been about crossing boundaries or giving in to impulse. It had been about recognition, about allowing connection to exist without fear, about seeing someone clearly and being seen in return. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow burn romance tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection that changed everything in silence? And hit the bell so you never miss a story that lingers long after the night ends.